Thank you. I have some material which can be circulated. I don't know how many of you might have copies of this, but Judy will circulate. There's only 20 each. One is a copy of the slide presentation that I'm presenting, and the other is essentially the principles and guidelines on for a Queensland biodiversity strategy. I thought it was useful to talk about this today because, yes, I'll just go yes and you can change to the next one. Because the movement in Queensland has been campaigning for a number of years for a statewide biodiversity strategy. The government has finally agreed, and we're sort of in the box seat to help shape that. But in the process of thinking about it, we wanted to all be on the same page. We wanted for it to be meaningful, and when you think about the situation we're in, biodiversity really is about life on Earth, and we're entering into the sixth most significant extinction episode this Earth has ever experienced. We and the rest of the species on this Earth are in dire straits, and we're responsible for it. And the window of opportunity to do something about it is closing fast. So, and with a background that, because most of the trend indicators are going downwards, it tells us something that our strategies in the past have not been effective. They're not working. So it seemed very timely to start thinking about, well, why is that so? And if we can identify those barriers, then maybe we've got a chance of getting a successful biodiversity strategy. So given there is a crisis, I think it's very important that we do portray a crisis, because we need to galvanise people, and mostly human beings are not galvanised unless they perceive there's a crisis. It has to be very compelling, but it also has to have hope and mechanisms for achieving something positive, because otherwise everyone turns off. So it needs to be a very constructive dialogue about the biodiversity crisis. The fundamental thing that we just can't get away from is that the root cause of the biodiversity crisis on this Earth is us. We're responsible. It's our escalating numbers and our impacts. And put it very simply, you could say we're a bunch of consumers and polluters. And so that's a very neat way. Everything we do, we are changing the environment, and we are taking away the space available for other species. So unless we address that, and it seems as though there is some dialogue nationally and at a state level, but not serious, unless we address this root cause that there's too many of us and we are consuming in bad ways and polluting the environment in manifold ways, then there's not much hope. The traditional way, so out of that, what's the outcome? We tend to draw up a list, and I think globally everyone now recognises there's 7 big killers. The fragmentation and loss of habitat and overconsumption of natural resources and pollution. Pollution is not just putting toxic chemicals into the environment, it's adding abnormal amounts. We are changing biogeochemical cycles with our fertilisers, changing nitrogen, potassium levels, etc., such that biodiversity is being severely impacted. So most of you are familiar with those, but they're the outcomes of the root cause. Barriers to addressing the crisis. Well, I bring them down to those 3. We can look at it in terms of sociological, economic, and ecological. So that's the prime thing I want to talk about, is especially the ecological in the context of the others. Overcoming the barriers, that's obviously what we're about. I think an important thing that I want to talk about is that there is a traditional way of thinking which is short-term, and ecological thinking, or the way biodiversity behaves is very long term, and it's that mismatch between those two time frames that is part of the problem. All right, the next one. Barriers, yes. Let's talk about the first one, what I call the sociological. Essentially for me, the most critical thing is we're not all on the same page. That's what that's about. And for various reasons, and I won't deal with the ignorance because we can fix that up, ignorance and inability because people are in poverty traps, they can't afford to change the way they're doing things because they're heavily in debt, etc. So that's one category. I won't focus on that. The critical one, I believe, is that there is a disparity between conceptual frameworks. There's the old way of thinking, which is a very mechanical way of thinking that nature and biodiversity is a box of tricks, of cogs and wheels. You can take one bit out and you can predict, you know how it behaves, you can project that, you bash up the environment, you remove it, it'll recover in a progressive, linear way, predictably, and so you can do anything because it'll come back. Or that you'll have a technological fix, science will always come to the rescue. There's a whole lot of excuses as to justifying the loss of biodiversity and an optimism that everything will be okay. So that equilibrium system is what is used for sustained yield in forestries, in fisheries, and most extractive industries except mining, which there's a general recognition that it's a one-off. But this thing, thinking that we can control the environment, is a root cause of a lot of our problems. The reality is that everything changes in nature. Natural ecosystems are dynamic. They're very, very complex at a whole range of levels in terms of the number of things that are there, the dynamics. Complexity is something that we should recognise and embrace. And also the most important thing to realise these days is that nature is full of surprises, as was experienced by the various collapses of fisheries, and you know a lot of those examples, the crash and the loss of the coral reefs in the Caribbean. So many examples of ecosystem collapse suddenly, unpredictably. No one was able to predict these things were going to happen. We now know that non-linear behaviour in ecosystems is more common than was thought. And we don't know how to control nature. We don't understand how it functions adequately. And we don't take into account that all things are linked and that there are feedback mechanisms. And where we talk about biodiversity, conserving biodiversity, the objective is really about achieving resilience of biodiversity so that it's stable, it's able to withstand the sort of natural disturbance regimes without collapsing. And I'm suggesting that most of us are familiar, whether we know it or not, with systems thinking. We talk about ecosystems. They are systems of many things working together, but the problem is our numbers now are so large and our impact so pervasive, we actually have to talk about linked ecological and social systems. And to answer the question asked about the relationship between the local and the global, people are now starting to talk about social ecological earth systems. And perhaps that answers one of the questions, is that I'll talk about a framework, an ecological, social ecological systems framework, which is becoming, there's a lot of research going into that, which to provide tools for dealing with complexity. resilience thinking, that's basically capacity to withstand, for nature to withstand shocks. And I've got a number of parameters that say what are the characteristics of a resilient world? What would it look like? So I'd like you to think about those. They're not written in stone. I think